She hadn't spoken in days. Her voice, once sharp enough to cut foreign kings, had withered into silence, but her hands still moved, slowly, deliberately, scratching out lines on parchment beneath candlelight so dim the shadows read over her shoulder. Elizabeth Tudor, Queen of England, once monarch of oceans and empires, lay on cushions soaked in her own sweat, draped in cloth of gold, unmoving. Her courtiers waited in terror, not for her orders, but for her end. Yet in those final hours, her fingers betrayed her silence. They summoned ink. They summoned paper. They summoned a letter. It was not recorded. No court scribe documented it. No secretary claimed authorship. No recipient ever named. It was simply mentioned once in the diary of a minor servant who wrote that Her Majesty did mark something with shaking hand, and none dared ask the meaning. No one has seen the letter, no one admits to it surviving, but the whisper has endured, that in her final act, Elizabeth I wrote not for posterity, not for power, but for privacy, for herself, perhaps to God, perhaps to no one, perhaps to the future, and if she did, what did it say? Because when a woman like Elizabeth writes with trembling hands, it is not a note, it is not diplomacy, it is confession. She had nothing left to prove. The crown was secure. The wars were paused. The line of succession had been, reluctantly, settled. There was no audience left to manipulate, no throne to protect. Only the breath in her lungs, the weight of her legacy, and the silence between them. What does a queen confess when the empire can no longer hear her? What truth can finally be spoken when the body no longer obeys the politics of strength? What if the letter did not contain command, but remorse? What if the woman who ruled for 44 years in armor, made of language and image, finally dropped the pretense? And what if someone read it and destroyed it? She was never meant to rule. Elizabeth was born the second daughter of a disgraced wife, branded illegitimate before she could speak her name. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was beheaded when Elizabeth was just 2 years old. Her father, Henry VIII, oscillated between dismissal and suspicion. Her youth was marked not by preparation for sovereignty, but by survival. Books, silence, and calculation became her weapons. She watched as others, men, failed and fell. Brothers, protectors, regents. Every one of them underestimated her, until it was too late. She learned that intimacy was a liability, that desire could be a scaffold, that to be loved as a woman in power was to be endangered, and so she forged a different identity, the Virgin Queen, a monarch untouchable not only by marriage but by emotion. Her body became a symbol of England itself, pure, invulnerable, perpetual. She mastered image, her face powdered white, her hair styled into flame, her robes embedded with eyes and suns. She would be omniscient, she would be eternal, she would be alone. But beneath the spectacle was an unrelenting control. Elizabeth trusted no one completely. Her Privy Council was a battlefield of egos she kept in check with delay and contradiction. Her spymaster, Francis Walsingham, built an intelligence network that burrowed into Europe's courts like a worm through wood. She read foreign dispatches personally. She responded to marriage proposals with flirtation, never commitment. She spoke in riddles, delayed decisions, and wrote letters designed to be interpreted 6 different ways. Every gesture was political armor. She ruled a country in constant threat. From Catholic Spain, from French intrigue, from internal rebellion, and she did so without a husband, without an heir, and without collapsing. But the cost was not visible. Not yet. It built slowly. The deaths of her closest advisors, Robert Dudley, William Cecil, Walsingham himself, left her surrounded by younger men who neither feared nor understood her. Her body aged, her circle shrank, and still she refused to speak of succession, because to name a successor was to invite her own end. Then came the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, a cousin, a rival, a queen anointed by Catholic hands, held prisoner for 19 years in England before being finally condemned. Elizabeth signed the death warrant, and then wept. She claimed she hadn't meant it, that the counsel had misled her, that the executioner acted too quickly, but no one believed her. Not really, because Elizabeth had always known what she was doing. What she didn't know, couldn't control, was what that act would cost her soul. And that soul, once steel-clad in iconography, began to splinter. In her final decade, she began to lose the war against time. The faces around her changed. The portraits stopped resembling the woman in the mirror. The courtiers whispered about her temper, her solitude, her sleeplessness. She would stand for hours, refusing to lie down. She feared that if she slept, she would not wake, that if she ceded to stillness, she would dissolve into irrelevance. But power does not ask permission to leave, and neither does death. As her body weakened, her resolve only deepened. She refused all doctors. She resisted clergy. She would not name James of Scotland her heir until the breath had nearly left her. And as her chamber darkened, she sat in layers of royal brocade, her crown now too heavy for her brow, and said nothing. Except perhaps in a letter. One no one was meant to find, because to write something down, once power has faded, once the mask has slipped, is to surrender what the crown forbids, the private truth. The woman who had ruled for nearly half a century could no longer speak. In the final months of her life, Queen Elizabeth I did not rage. She did not command. She did not give farewells. She simply fell into silence, prolonged, eerie, and deliberate. She refused to lie in her bed, choosing instead to stand for hours, leaning against cushions, slouched in her robes like armor that no longer fit. Her body had become brittle. Her legs swelled. Her mind wandered. But still she would not sit. To sit was to surrender. To sleep was to die. She knew this. Everyone in the room knew this. Her court remained at her side, but they were no longer sure if they were serving a monarch or a relic. Physicians attempted to examine her. She waved them off. Clergy approached with sacraments. She turned away. In the corridors, whispers grew louder. The Queen has lost her mind. The Queen is readying herself for death. The Queen is already gone. And in the middle of that slow unraveling, beneath the surface of ritual, behind the embroidery of the crown, something else emerged. An object. A page. A letter. It was rumored to have been written not once, but in fragments, penned over days when her fingers could still move, hidden beneath the stack of linens beside her chair, slipped to an unnamed hand when the candle burned low. The letter, according to a chambermaid's third-hand account, was not addressed to any nobleman, nor to James VI of Scotland, nor to her Privy Council. It had no salutation, no seal. It was written in her own hand, shaky, erratic, missing punctuation. It was, if it existed, the only document she composed in her final days. And it was not an order. It was something else. What might it have contained? Some believe it was a confession, a reckoning with the one thing she could never perform away, loneliness. That in the absence of pageantry, of male suitors and court masks, what remained was a woman unmothered, unwed, and untouched. Others say it was a warning, that she wrote of James, the heir she refused to acknowledge publicly, that she feared what he might do with England, that she regretted not securing the realm's future on firmer terms. Still, others believe she named her regrets in flesh. Mary, Queen of Scots, the Earl of Essex, the thousands who died in her wars and her prisons and her silence. But none of this is confirmed, because the letter disappeared. There is no record of it in the Privy Council archives, no mention of it in the official death inventories, no copy retained by royal secretaries, only shadows, a fleeting reference in the diary of a foreign ambassador's assistant, who claimed that a folded paper was handed to a courtier and burned unread, Another letter from a Jesuit spy refers to a final utterance by the Queen that was too dangerous for parchment. But no document remains, and that is the most disturbing detail of all, because Elizabeth's entire reign was constructed through documents, proclamations, declarations, signed treaties, scripted performances. Her control over language was absolute. She used her words to destroy rebellions, delay marriages, and sanctify violence. If she wrote something and hid it, if she let words escape the mask, it was because those words no longer served the crown. It was a private act, which is to say, a dangerous one. Her final days became a slow-motion collapse, not dramatic, not bloody, but haunting. She refused food, refused rest, spoke to no one, her eyes fixed on nothing. Her hands trembled in her lap, no longer adorned with rings. The courtiers knelt, but she didn't see them. The torchlight flickered, but she gave no sign of care. Only once, it said, did she stir. She reached for something, not a hand, not a robe, a sheet of paper. And then she let it fall. What monarch writes a letter they do not wish preserved? One who no longer believes in monuments, one who knows the truth must be hidden to protect the illusion they built. It is a peculiar kind of horror, the kind that doesn't bleed, doesn't scream, doesn't break. It just vanishes, the horror of erasure, of knowing something once existed and was made to disappear, not because it was false, but because it was too true. That is what surrounds the letter Elizabeth Vi is said to have written before she died, a final piece of herself, folded into silence, extinguished by hands sworn to preserve not truth but legend. It wasn't destroyed for being dangerous to England. It was destroyed for being dangerous to the myth of Elizabeth. What if that letter had said what she could never say aloud? That she had executed Mary, Queen of Scots, not from strength, but from fear. That the man she loved most, Robert Dudley, had betrayed her. That her celibacy had become a prison. That her crown was an iron halo she could never remove. What if she had named names, those who had deceived her, abandoned her, manipulated her from within the court she mastered for decades? What if she had written that the very kingdom she had ruled now repulsed her, and that her carefully constructed mask had fused too tightly to her skin? Elizabeth had been an architect of absence. She ruled without a husband, without an heir, without a tomb in waiting. Her entire life was an act of subtraction, removing possibilities so that power could survive. But a letter, that would be an addition. A re-entry into the human. A return to vulnerability. And vulnerability was anathema to the crown she wore. It would unmake everything she had spent half a century building. Those who witnessed her last days knew this. They had served her theatre. They had spoken her language. They understood that such a letter could not be allowed to exist. If it criticized James, it was treason. If it criticized Elizabeth herself, it was an undoing. If it showed remorse, it was a betrayal of the image they had sculpted into marble while she was still alive. There is every reason to believe it was taken and burned, perhaps by Cecil, perhaps by the bishop, perhaps by a trembling maid ordered not to read, but to obey. We will never know. And that is the point. The monarchy depends not on what is remembered, but on what is removed. They did not need to suppress a rebellion. They needed only to suppress a document, one page, a few lines. That's all it takes to fracture a mythology. But myths do not die quietly. They leave residue. We see it in the dissonance between her silence and her legacy, in the way her portrait stopped aging while her body collapsed, in the way the Virgin Queen's funeral procession moved through London as if heaven itself had closed its doors, while no one could say with certainty who she had loved, who she had hated, or what she had truly feared. The secret letter, if it existed, wasn't dangerous because it named crimes. It was dangerous because it might have contained truth, And in courts built on control, truth is the one thing that must never be allowed to survive the sovereign. She died without a word, no final speech, no public blessing, no carefully dictated proclamation to guide the kingdom beyond her breath. Just a silence thick as velvet, and the slow extinguishing of a presence that had once filled every corridor of Europe's imagination. Elizabeth I, queen of tact and terror, master of appearances and architect of absence, simply ceased. Her body lay cold under layers of cloth woven with gold, her pale hand folded across a chest that never bore air nor confession. And somewhere, if the rumor holds, a letter went into fire, or into a drawer, or into the river. Her successor, James VI of Scotland, entered the English court not in triumph, but with caution. He had waited all his life for her death, but found no glory in its arrival. He gave her a grand funeral. He praised her reign, but he made sure that nothing uncomfortable remained behind. He had every reason to erase what she may have written. For if the Queen had expressed doubt in him, regret for Mary's death, or even sorrow for her own isolation, he would inherit a throne haunted by her truth, not sanctified by her silence. What does it mean when a monarch's most honest moment must be destroyed? It means that her myth mattered more than her mind. That a woman who ruled without marrying, without confessing, without yielding, was allowed to be many things, but never vulnerable, never human, never afraid. So they buried her, not just in stone, but in narrative. And if that letter ever lived, it was sacrificed not to protect England, but to protect the illusion that one woman, alone for 44 years, never once wished to be seen. If you want to hear more of the stories they tried to bury, subscribe. We don't just remember, we reveal.